Governments impose many other kinds of economic regulations beyond just price controls. Free markets are not markets free of regulation. In fact, a legal system which establishes and enforces property rights and protects the freedom to buy and sell goods and services is itself a kind of regulation. Regulations set the rules all economic agents must follow. That said, what we're concerned about here are the regulations which do interfere with markets. These are regulations which impact the cost of production. Regulations are an application of law by government or regulatory agencies for various economics-related purposes. If a regulation raises the cost of production for firms, then the effect of these regulations will be a higher market price and a lower market quantity. Compared to an unregulated market, a regulated market will see some deadweight loss. There will be some mutually beneficial trades which will essentially be outlawed by the regulation. Let's look at some examples. Many government regulations are designed to impose some control over markets through licensing and permitting. Essentially, all businesses are required to be licensed for tax purposes. Acquiring these licenses imposes a real cost on new businesses, which may act as a slight barrier to entry, which prevents full competition. According to data from the World Bank, the US ranks below countries like South Korea, Singapore, Ireland, Canada, Denmark, and Norway when it comes to minimizing these barriers. Many occupations, such as doctors, lawyers, and hairstylists, require workers to get a license. These licenses restrict competition and can end up raising costs for consumers. And the government also requires some trades to acquire a permit first. Imports and exports with other nations are often restricted and require a permit. Local governments also require permits before firms can build new homes or commercial spaces. Another reason for regulation is health and safety. Government agencies impose regulations about workplace safety, which require employers to enact certain safety precautions, which can be costly. Other agencies require firms to use certain production methods or restrict production methods in order to protect the environment, particularly in cases where environmental damage has a negative impact on human health. And other rules and restrictions are enforced on some markets for reasons of health and safety. The rules of the road apply to commercial drivers just like they do for regular drivers. Building codes are enforced to protect the humans who will occupy it later, and financial markets are regulated to prevent firms from taking on major risks which threaten the broader economy, just to name a few. Our last reason for regulations is consumer protection and information. The FDA regulates food and drug production in the name of product safety, and other kinds of products like cars, air travel, and healthcare are similarly regulated. Many firms are required to make public disclosures, which can be costly to produce. Foods are required to put nutrition facts on the packaging. Influencers have to declare when a post is a paid advertisement, and health insurance companies are required to report certain information to customers. And of course, there are many bans. Bans on drugs, bans on products declared dangerous, and bans on certain trade practices. Now, we're lumping all of these together and showing this graph, which tells us the effect is higher prices and deadweight loss, which is bad. That's not wrong. All of these kinds of regulation have this effect on the markets they regulate. But of course, that doesn't mean all the regulations should be done away with. There are other considerations beyond economics, and we'll talk about some circumstances where the higher price actually eliminates deadweight loss instead of creating it. Regulatory agencies like OSHA, which establish and enforce rules about workplace safety, can be burdensome and misguided in some instances. But generally, it is probably good to set a minimum level for safety standards that we want firms to meet. The financial industry has seen a lot of back and forth with regulations, sometimes going through periods of deregulation and other times seeing tighter regulations. One thing that's clear, though, is that the government often isn't wiser or smarter than the industries they regulate, and their mistakes can be as bad as the mistakes companies make. I'll leave you with this thought. A lot of regulation is done in the name of protecting people. Lots of products are banned because they pose a high risk to the individuals using them. When these regulations are defended, it's often argued that you can't trust businesses to make their products safe because the profit motive might lead them to take shortcuts or to lie. But it seems to me, if that were the case, that the government would allow stores which sold these products with clear warnings provided to the customer. Consider pharmaceutical drugs. It often takes drug companies the better part of a decade to get their finished product approved by the FDA. Meanwhile, that drug could be treating people now. What if there was a store where you could get drugs which haven't been approved yet, and buyers are told clearly that the drug they're buying has not been deemed safe? Perhaps the lack of such stores tells us that regulation is as much about not trusting consumers as it is about not trusting producers.